I went camping with my wife and her friends. After a short walk with my 10-year-old son, everything. The memory of that weekend refuses to leave me. Even now, years later, I can still hear the quiet rustle of branches, the crunch of boots over pine needles, the hushed laughter carrying across the firelight. We had driven out together, my wife, her circle of old college companions, our boy, and me, heading toward a stretch of forest where phone signals vanished and silence ruled. I remember feeling both relieved and wary. Relieved because escape from buzzing notifications promised calm, wary because isolation amplifies what we try to bury. Our son, full of boundless curiosity, darted ahead on the trail as we unpacked tents near a clearing by the lake. His joy anchored me, reminded me why I agreed to spend 3 nights among people I hardly knew well. They were her friends, not mine, faces I'd seen in photographs, names I'd heard in passing. Still, politeness demanded smiles, and I wore them dutifully, though underneath pulsed a restless energy I couldn't quite explain. The women laughed easily, pouring wine into tin cups, speaking in a language of shared memories from years I had never lived. Their voices rose like sparks, bright against the growing dusk. My wife glowed in that light, leaning closer to them, glowing with the kind of joy I rarely managed to draw from her anymore. Watching her in that moment felt both beautiful and strange, as though I were peering at someone I loved through glass, close yet unreachable. I tried to focus on the fire, on helping my boy roast marshmallows, but my gaze kept drifting across the circle. Every gesture, every smile, every glance carried weight I didn't want to acknowledge. It wasn't simply admiration for beauty. It was something more dangerous, something that stirred in the chest like a storm refusing to settle. Later that evening, when stars appeared in staggering numbers above the treetops, I excused myself with my son. We walked a short distance into the woods, our flashlight beams slicing the darkness. He asked questions about constellations, about owls, about whether bears roamed nearby. I answered, steady, protective, though my thoughts strayed again and again to the fire we had left behind, to faces illuminated by its glow, to eyes that had lingered on mine longer than they should have. I didn't know then that a single step away from that fire would mark the beginning of a path I couldn't retrace. That night, everything ordinary unraveled quietly, and temptation began its patient work. Morning arrived clothed in mist, draped across the lake like a veil hiding secret. Birds announced the dawn with insistent calls, though most of the camp still slept. I awoke early, restless, the air inside our tent damp with condensation. My wife lay beside me, hair tousled, face turned away. For a moment I studied her, wondering when the distance between us had grown so wide. She looked peaceful, yet her peace felt unreachable, like a shoreline across water I could never swim. I slipped outside quietly. The world carried that sacred stillness only forests know, broken only by the occasional splash of fish or the creak of branches swaying overhead. I brewed coffee on the camp stove, its bitter fragrance rising like smoke signals through the cool air. That was when she appeared, one of her friends, stepping out from her own tent, wrapping a blanket across her shoulders. She greeted me softly, her voice still heavy with sleep. There was something in her eyes I hadn't noticed before, perhaps because I hadn't allowed myself to look too closely the night before. Now, in the pale light, nothing distracted me from the subtle curve of her smile, the quiet curiosity in her gaze. I handed her a cup without thinking, and when our fingers brushed, a spark leapt through me, quick and undeniable. We talked in hushed tones so as not to disturb the others. At first, the conversation carried no weight, weather, the view, the beauty of mornings like this, but beneath every word lay a current I couldn't ignore. Her laughter lingered longer than it needed to. My responses stumbled, uneven, betraying a nervous energy I fought to contain. I knew I should step back, retreat, remind myself of boundaries, yet something inside me leaned forward, drawn closer by invisible gravity. Eventually, the camp stirred. Voices rose, footsteps shuffled, the day began with chatter and activity. My wife emerged, still glowing in her familiar circle of friends, and I slipped back into my role: husband, father, quiet participant. Yet inside, the ground had shifted. That brief exchange, simple on the surface, carried weight far heavier than it should have. I felt it every time my eyes wandered toward her, every time her gaze found mine across the clearing. Later, when we hiked together as a group, I kept my boy close at my side, but my attention wandered relentlessly. The trail stretched long, roots twisting underfoot, sunlight breaking through branches in golden beams. Around me, voices blended into a blur. All I could hear was the echo of our morning conversation, every word replaying, every look magnified. By the time we returned to camp, the line between harmless companionship and forbidden desire had blurred dangerously. I knew I should resist. Instead, I found myself waiting for the next moment, the next glance, the next excuse. Afternoon sunlight shimmered across the water, its surface scattered with diamonds of light. After the long hike, everyone sprawled lazily near the shoreline. Some napped, others played card games, while my son skipped stones with relentless focus. I pretended to read a book, though the words dissolved instantly, leaving only the heavy thrum of my heartbeat. She sat a short distance away, legs tucked under her, hair glinting where sunlight touched it. Every time her laughter drifted toward me, I felt caught between guilt and fascination. My wife reclined nearby, telling stories with two of her closest friends, entirely unaware of the undercurrent dragging me deeper. That ignorance made me uneasy, but it also tempted me further, as though secrecy itself carried its own intoxication. At one point, she stood, brushing sand from her hands, and suggested gathering firewood before evening fell. Nobody volunteered. The others groaned, too comfortable in their places, promising to do it later. She glanced in my direction, eyes steady, lips curved ever so slightly. Without hesitation, I closed my book, offering to join her. The decision felt reckless, yet inevitable. We walked into the trees, leaving the chatter behind. Branches snapped softly beneath our boots. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, patterns shifting across her shoulders as she moved ahead of me. I tried to focus on practical things, dry sticks, fallen branches, but the quiet closeness unsettled me. When she bent to lift a log, I caught the faint scent of her hair, and suddenly my chest tightened, air caught somewhere between restraint and desire. We gathered slowly, almost deliberately, as though both of us wanted to prolong the errand. Conversation flowed in low tones. Questions about my work, remarks about the forest, fleeting admissions about feeling restless with life. Each word stitched a thread between us, invisible yet undeniable. Her gaze lingered longer now, no longer casual, and when our hands brushed over the same branch, neither of us pulled away immediately. A gust of wind stirred the trees, startling a pair of crows overhead. The sudden sound snapped me back into awareness. I forced a laugh, shaking my head as though I could scatter the thoughts clinging too close. She smiled knowingly, not mocking, not shy, only acknowledging what both of us understood but neither dared to speak. By the time we returned, arms full of wood, I felt changed again. The campfire burned hotter that evening, though not because of the logs we carried. Something between us had ignited, silent yet searing, hidden in plain sight. Night returned with its familiar cloak of shadows, and the air cooled quickly after sunset. The campfire roared at the center of our small world, sparks rising into the star-pierced sky. My son drifted toward sleep, wrapped in a blanket, his head resting against my shoulder until eventually my wife guided him into the tent. I stayed behind with the others, pretending to enjoy the lively chatter, though in truth, I listened only for her voice. Wine flowed freely, laughter grew louder, and I found myself caught between amusement and anticipation. She sat across the fire, flame light dancing across her features, her eyes fixed on me more often than coincidence allowed. Each glance felt like a secret message, as though the fire spoke a language only the two of us could hear. I answered her without words, slight smiles, brief nods, a gaze held longer than it should have been. As the hour grew late, conversations splintered. Some retreated to their tents, others lingered, still drinking, still telling half-forgotten stories. Eventually, only she and I remained near the embers, silence growing between us, thicker than the night itself. Crickets sang in the background, water lapped faintly at the shore, and for the first time all day, we were truly alone. She leaned forward, feeding the fire with a last piece of wood. The glow illuminated her eyes, and I felt something inside me surrender. My chest carried the weight of conflicting loyalties, yet my body betrayed me, leaning closer, searching for words that wouldn't come. She spoke softly, almost in a whisper, confessing that the forest felt alive, that the air itself seemed charged. I knew exactly what she meant. The silence that followed was unbearable. Every instinct urged me to stand, to retreat, to smother the rising flame before it consumed everything. Yet my hand moved instead, resting inches from hers on the log where we sat. She didn't pull away. Her fingers shifted slightly, brushing mine, and that single touch electrified the night more than any thunderstorm could. I closed my eyes briefly, fighting the urge, reminding myself of my wife asleep only a few yards away, of my son dreaming peacefully, trusting me to protect him. The guilt struck hard, but desire struck harder, louder, demanding attention. For a suspended moment, the world felt narrowed to nothing but her nearness, her breath mingling with mine, the temptation that neither of us dared name aloud. When another tent unzipped suddenly, voices spilling into the clearing, we both jumped back as though burned. The moment dissolved, leaving only smoke, heat, and unspoken understanding. The danger had been real, undeniable, and it would return. The following day carried a strange heaviness, as though the entire forest sensed what had almost happened. Sunlight pierced the canopy in harsh beams, exposing every shadow, yet inside me everything remained hidden. My wife greeted me cheerfully over breakfast, speaking about plans for swimming, about teaching our boy how to fish from the dock. I nodded, smiled, played the role expected of me, though beneath the surface I was unraveling. She moved through camp with an ease that unsettled me. To anyone watching, she appeared perfectly ordinary, helping prepare food, laughing with the others, tending to small chores, but every so often her eyes would find mine. Those fleeting glances held volumes. They reminded me of the firelight, the near touch, the heat that still lingered on my skin. I carried those memories like contraband, hidden in plain sight, terrified of discovery yet unwilling to let them go. Later, when most of the group went down to the lake, I volunteered to remain behind, claiming I needed to mend a loosened tent line. My excuse was thin, but nobody questioned it. Moments afterward, she appeared beside me, holding a bundle of rope, offering help I hadn't asked for. The look in her eyes told me everything. She knew why I had stayed, and she had chosen to stay as well. We worked side by side in silence, hands brushing now and again, the air thick with unspoken tension. Every accidental contact lingered too long, charged with intent. At one point, as I leaned to tighten a knot, her hand settled briefly on my shoulder. That single gesture threatened to undo me completely. I turned toward her, breath caught, heart hammering, and for a terrifying instant I nearly abandoned restraint entirely. But footsteps sounded in the distance, laughter approaching from the lake. We separated quickly, arranging ourselves to look occupied. My wife's voice called out, cheerful and trusting, and guilt washed over me like cold water. I answered, steady, pretending nothing had shifted, though inside I shook with the force of the near miss. That night, long after everyone else had gone to sleep, I lay awake in the tent listening to the rhythm of her breathing beside me. I stared at the canvas ceiling, torn between the comfort of my family and the dangerous fire smoldering only a few tents away. Every choice felt like betrayal, betrayal if I surrendered, betrayal if I resisted yet kept longing for more. The forest no longer felt peaceful. It felt like a cage tightening around me, closing in with every heartbeat, every secret thought, every stolen glance. The final morning arrived cloaked in silence, the kind that feels heavy rather than calm. Mist rolled off the lake in pale ribbons, and dew clung to every blade of grass. I rose early, unable to bear the restless turning inside the tent. My wife stirred but did not wake, and my son lay curled peacefully under blankets. I slipped outside, lungs aching for clarity I knew I wouldn't find. She was already there, standing near the water's edge, arms wrapped around herself as if bracing against the chill. When she turned and saw me, neither of us spoke. Words would have been useless. We walked together along the narrow path that circled the lake, footsteps crunching softly on damp earth. At a bend in the trail, hidden from camp by thick trees, we stopped. The air felt charged again, heavy with the weight of everything unspoken. Her eyes searched mine, not demanding, not pleading, simply waiting. I felt myself teetering on the precipice, torn between desire and loyalty, between the fire that burned inside me and the life I had built brick by brick. She reached for my hand. The contact was light, hesitant, yet it sent shockwaves through me. I could have pulled away. I could have ended everything in that instant. Instead, I stood frozen, heart pounding so loudly I feared the forest itself would hear. For a few suspended breaths, temptation became reality. I saw every possibility laid bare. Stolen nights, lies carefully spun, a secret passion hidden in shadows. Yet I also saw my wife's smile, my son's trust, the fragile fabric of family that had carried me this far. To choose one was to destroy the other. There was no middle ground. I released her hand. Slowly, deliberately, as though unclasping a piece of myself I could never retrieve. Her expression didn't falter, only softened with understanding, as though she had expected this ending all along. She nodded once, stepped back, and turned toward camp without another word. I remained there, watching mist rise from the water, breathing hard as if I had outrun something enormous. Perhaps I had. Perhaps I hadn't. When I finally returned, my wife was pouring coffee, her voice warm, her smile untouched by suspicion. My son ran to show me a fish he had caught, pride glowing in his eyes. I smiled, I laughed, I stepped back into my role. Yet deep inside, I carried the knowledge of how close I had come, how thin the line truly was between love and ruin. The forest would keep our secret, but I knew it would follow me always, a shadow just beyond the firelight.